Case 1. Raye Dawn Smith. There is a photograph of Kelsey Smith-Briggs that has become one of the most recognized images in Oklahoma child welfare history. She is tiny. She is blonde. She has the kind of wide, trusting eyes that only very young children have. Eyes that still believe the world is entirely safe. Kelsey was 2 years old when she died on October 11, 2005, in Meeker, Oklahoma. She weighed barely 22 pounds. Her small body bore the unmistakable marks of prolonged, systematic abuse, a fractured spine, bruising across her torso, and internal injuries that no 2-year-old should ever have. But the story of Kelsey Smith-Briggs does not begin on the day she died. It begins years earlier, in the complicated and deeply troubled circumstances of her short life. And at the center of that story, at the very heart of the failure that led to Kelsey's death, is her mother, Raye Dawn Smith. Raye Dawn Smith was a young Oklahoma woman who, by all outward appearances, wanted people to believe she was a devoted mother. She spoke publicly about her love for Kelsey. She participated in custody battles that she framed as maternal protection. She presented herself, repeatedly and convincingly to some, as a mother fighting for her child. But the evidence that would eventually come to light painted a portrait that was almost unrecognizable compared to the image she cultivated. Kelsey's life was marked by instability from the very beginning. Her parents, Raye Dawn Smith and Lance Briggs, separated when Kelsey was an infant, and what followed was a prolonged, acrimonious custody dispute that would drag the little girl through the court system repeatedly during her brief life. Kelsey's paternal grandmother, Kathy Briggs, became one of the most vocal advocates for the child, sounding alarm after alarm to the Oklahoma Department of Human Services about the conditions in Raye Dawn's home. Kathy Briggs would later become the face of Oklahoma child welfare reform, her grief channeled into legislative change that bore Kelsey's name. The man at the center of the abuse, prosecutors would argue, was Raye Dawn's then-husband Michael Lee Porter. Porter was a man with a history of concerning behavior, and the evidence suggested that under his roof, Kelsey endured repeated physical abuse. But here is where Raye Dawn Smith's case becomes particularly chilling, and particularly relevant to the question of maternal failure. She knew. Or at minimum, the jury that convicted her determined that she had to have known. She was there. She was the mother. She saw the bruises. She heard the cries. And she did not stop it. In the months leading up to Kelsey's death, DHS received multiple reports about the child's welfare. Kelsey was removed from the home at various points, only to be returned. The system, it would later be acknowledged, failed Kelsey in ways that prompted sweeping reform. But the system's failure did not absolve the individuals in that home of their responsibility. On October 11, 2005, Kelsey Smith-Briggs was found unresponsive. She was transported to the hospital, where she was pronounced dead. The medical examiner determined that her death was a homicide. The injuries that killed her were not the result of a single event. They were the result of sustained, repeated abuse over time, abuse that occurred in a home where her mother lived. Michael Lee Porter was charged and convicted of enabling child abuse. He received 30 years. But the case that captivated Oklahoma, the case that ignited a firestorm of public outrage, was the case against Raye Dawn Smith. She was charged with enabling child abuse resulting in the death of her child, a charge that essentially alleged she stood by and allowed her daughter to be killed. The trial was contentious. Raye Dawn's defense team argued that she did not know the extent of the abuse, that she herself was a victim of Porter's control and manipulation, and that she had tried to protect Kelsey within the limitations of her circumstances. The prosecution painted a different picture, a mother who chose her relationship with a man over the safety of her child, who had access to information that should have spurred her to action, and who took no meaningful steps to shield Kelsey from what was happening. On July 18, 2007, the jury delivered its verdict. Raye Dawn Smith was found guilty of enabling child abuse resulting in the death of her child. She was sentenced to 27 years in prison. The courtroom reaction was intense. Kelsey's paternal family, who had fought so hard and for so long to protect the little girl, wept. Kathy Briggs, Kelsey's grandmother, would go on to testify before the Oklahoma legislature, and in 2009, Kelsey's law was enacted, sweeping child welfare reform legislation that tightened the rules around DHS investigations, increased accountability, and mandated better communication between the courts and child welfare agencies. Kelsey's law was Kelsey's legacy. It was the thing her short life, cut off at just 2 years, produced for Oklahoma's children going forward. It was the only good thing that could be pulled from the wreckage of her story. Raye Dawn Smith has been incarcerated since her conviction in 2007. In June 2024, a commutation request was considered and denied. She remains in the custody of the Oklahoma Department of Corrections. She will not be eligible for release until she has served the majority of her 27-year sentence. Kelsey will have been gone for decades before Raye Dawn Smith sees the outside of a prison wall, if she ever does. Kelsey Smith-Briggs was 2 years old. She had blonde hair and wide, trusting eyes. She deserved better. She deserved everything. If this story moved you, please take a moment right now and hit the like button below. Leave a comment with Kelsey's name so we know you heard her story. And if you are not yet subscribed to Cold Case Revisited, please subscribe right now and hit the notification bell so you never miss a case. These stories need to be told, and your support makes sure they are. Case 2, Katherine Rutan. There is something uniquely devastating about a case where a body is never found. Because without a body, there is no grave to visit. There is no physical resting place. There is nowhere for a family to go and stand and say goodbye. For the family of 6-year-old Logan Tucker, that is the reality they have lived with since June 23, 2002, the day Logan disappeared from Woodward, Oklahoma, and was never seen again. Logan Tucker was a little boy by all accounts full of energy and curiosity. He had brown eyes and a grin that photographs captured in bursts of pure childhood joy. He was the kind of kid who should have grown up to play Little League baseball and complain about homework and eventually become something wonderful. Instead, he vanished at 6 years old, and the person responsible for his disappearance was the one person who was supposed to be his entire world. His mother. Katherine Rutan was a woman whose relationship with Logan had been complicated by the instability that often surrounds troubled households. Logan's life in the months leading up to his disappearance involved transitions, custody arrangements, a shifting domestic landscape, and a mother whose behavior toward her son had raised concerns for people in her orbit. But concerns, as is so often the case in child welfare, do not always translate into intervention fast enough. On June 23, 2002, Logan Tucker was reported missing from Woodward. He was 6 years old. Investigators descended on the area. A search was launched. The community, as communities do when a child goes missing, rallied. People walked fields. People searched along riverbanks and in wooded areas. Tips came in. Leads were pursued. But Logan was not found. Not that day. Not that week. Not that month. Not ever. As is standard in cases of missing children, law enforcement turned its attention to the people closest to the child. And as the investigation deepened, it became increasingly clear that Katherine Rutan was not giving investigators a consistent or credible account of what had happened to her son. Her story changed. Details shifted. The timeline she offered did not hold up under scrutiny. And over time, the evidence began to point in a direction that investigators had hoped with every fiber of their professional being would prove false. That Logan had not simply wandered away, had not been taken by a stranger, but had died at the hands of his own mother. The investigation was painstaking and lengthy. Building a first-degree murder case without a body is one of the most challenging things a prosecutor can do. It requires the kind of circumstantial evidence architecture that leaves no room for reasonable doubt, or at least, not enough room for 12 jurors to walk through. It requires testimony, physical evidence, inconsistent statements, forensic analysis, and a narrative that, even without a corpse, tells the undeniable story of what happened. Prosecutors in Woodward County built that case against Katherine Rutan. They laid out the evidence piece by piece. They presented the inconsistencies in her accounts. They brought forward witnesses who testified about her relationship with Logan, about her behavior in the days surrounding his disappearance, and about statements she had made that, when assembled together, formed a picture too damning to dismiss. On August 31, 2007, 5 years after Logan Tucker vanished, Katherine Rutan was convicted of first-degree murder. 5 years. 5 years during which Logan's family lived without answers. 5 years during which the investigation continued. 5 years during which Logan Tucker had no grave and no justice. But on that August day in 2007, In a Woodward County courtroom, justice finally arrived. Even if it arrived without the closure of ever knowing exactly where Logan's body was laid to rest. On October 9, 2007, Katherine Rutan was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She would never be free again. The jury had recommended the maximum sentence, and the court delivered it. There is a particular cruelty in what Katherine Rutan took from Logan Tucker's family beyond his life. She took the ability to bury him properly. She took the ability to stand at a headstone and grieve in the physical, tangible way that human beings need to grieve. She took the answer to the question that haunts his family every single day. Where is he? That question remains unanswered. Katherine Rutan has not provided the location of Logan's remains. His family continues to live with that open wound. Logan Tucker was 6 years old. He had his whole life in front of him. And somewhere in the Woodward County landscape, he remains, unfound, unnamed in the earth, but never forgotten by the people who loved him and never forgotten by the people at Cold Case Revisited who believe every child's story deserves to be told. Katherine Rutan is currently serving life without parole in the Oklahoma Department of Corrections. She will die in prison, and Logan Tucker will remain missing. If Logan's story touched you today, please hit the like button and drop a comment below. Let us know you were here for Logan. And please make sure you are subscribed to Cold Case Revisited. Every subscription helps us keep telling these stories. Hit subscribe and turn on your notifications. We'll be right back. Case 3. Amy Leann Hall. Most of the cases we cover on Cold Case Revisited involve the deaths of young children. Toddlers and babies who had no ability to defend themselves, no understanding of the danger they were in, no capacity to run or fight back or call for help. Those cases are devastating. But there is a particular kind of horror that attaches itself to a case where the victims were old enough to know what a mother's love is supposed to feel like, where they were old enough to have memories, old enough to have dreams and plans and relationships and futures stretching out ahead of them, and then to have all of that erased in the dark while they slept by the hand of their own mother. That is the story of Kaysen Tolliver and Chloe Tolliver, and it is one of the most disturbing cases in Oklahoma history. November 1st, 2018, a date that will live in the memory of everyone in Muskogee County who followed this case. It was in the early hours of that morning, in a home in Muskogee County, Oklahoma, that Amy Leann Hall took a firearm and walked to the bedrooms of her sleeping children. Kaysen Tolliver was 18 years old. He was on the threshold of his adult life, old enough to vote, old enough to serve his country, old enough to step out into the world and begin building his own story. Chloe Tolliver was 16 years old, a teenager, a young woman with her whole life still opening up in front of her. Both of them were asleep when Amy Leann Hall shot them. Both of them never woke up. And there was a third child, a 14-year-old daughter who was also shot that morning. She survived. The details of how she survived, what she endured, and what she witnessed are not ours to linger on beyond acknowledging that she was there, that she was shot by her own mother, and that she lived to tell a story no 14-year-old should ever have to tell. The aftermath of the shootings brought law enforcement to the Hall residence in the early morning hours. What they found was a scene of horror. 2 teenagers shot dead in their beds. A 14-year-old wounded and in desperate need of medical attention. And Amy Leann Hall, the mother. The investigation that followed was thorough and methodical. What emerged was a picture of domestic circumstances that had been deteriorating for some time. A household marked by tension and dysfunction, and a woman who had, at some point, made a decision of staggering and irreversible proportions. The why of Amy Leann Hall's actions, the motive, is something that criminal investigators and psychologists have examined in detail. Whatever personal crisis or mental state preceded her actions on November 1st, 2018, the result was the same. 2 children were dead, and 1 was wounded. Because the crimes occurred in Indian Country, a jurisdictional designation in Oklahoma with specific legal implications, the case fell under federal jurisdiction in addition to state involvement. This is an important legal detail because it shaped how the prosecution was ultimately structured and how the sentencing played out. Amy Leann Hall pleaded guilty. She did not take the case to trial. There was no jury that needed to weigh the evidence. She stood before the court and acknowledged what she had done. She pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree murder and additional charges related to the assault on her surviving daughter. The guilty plea meant that the community and the victim's broader family were spared the extended trauma of a lengthy trial. But it also meant that the full public accounting of what happened that November morning was limited to what emerged through the sentencing process. On March 29, 2024, more than 5 years after the murders, Amy Leann Hall was sentenced in federal court to 2 consecutive life sentences with no possibility of parole, along with additional consecutive sentences for the other charges. The sentence ensured that she will never leave federal custody. She will die in prison. 5 years between the crime and the sentencing. 5 years during which the surviving daughter lived with what she had seen and experienced. 5 years during which Caitlyn and Chloe Tolliver's family carried their grief. The sentencing in 2024 brought a legal conclusion, but for the family of Caitlyn and Chloe, there is no conclusion. There is only before and after. Caitlyn Tolliver was 18 years old. Chloe Tolliver was 16. They were asleep. They were safe, as children are supposed to be safe, in their beds in their home. And they never woke up. Their mother made sure of that. Amy Leann Hall will never see freedom again. 2 consecutive life sentences in federal prison mean exactly what they say. She is gone from the world, behind walls and fences, for the rest of her natural life. And Caitlyn and Chloe Tolliver remain forever young, 18 and 16, frozen in the November darkness of 2018. We owe it to Caitlyn and Chloe to keep telling their story. If you are watching this, please hit the like button right now and leave their names in the comments. And if you have not yet subscribed to Cold Case Revisited, now is the time. Hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, and help us make sure these victims are never forgotten. Let's continue. Case 4, Tifany Machel Adams. There are cases that shock you. And then there are cases that reach down into your chest and rearrange something fundamental about how you understand human beings and what they are capable of. The case of Tifany Machel Adams is the second kind, because this is not a story about a mother who snapped. It is not a story about mental illness or impulsive violence. It is a story about planning, about orchestration, about a grandmother, a woman who was supposed to represent the wisdom and protection that comes with age, who sat down and plotted the murders of 2 young women in cold blood and then sent others to carry out her design. And she almost got away with it. Veronica Butler was 27 years old. She was a mother herself. She had children who called her mom, children who needed her, children whose entire world she was. Jillian Kelly was 39 years old, also a mother, also someone's entire world. On March 30th, 2024, Easter weekend, both women vanished. They were last seen in Texas County, in the Oklahoma Panhandle, an area of flat, empty land where secrets can be buried deep and far from prying eyes. The 2 women had driven to pick up Veronica Butler's children, and they never came home. The investigation that followed was rapid and intensive. Within days, law enforcement had zeroed in on a circle of individuals connected to a custody dispute that had been simmering for some time. A dispute involving Veronica Butler's children and the family of the man those children were associated with. And at the center of that circle, pulling the strings, coordinating the pieces, directing the operation like a general deploying troops, was a grandmother. Tifany Machel Adams. Adams, along with her son Tadbert Cullum, Cullum's girlfriend Cora Twyman, and another individual, had allegedly conspired to lure Butler and Kelly and murder them. The motive, prosecutors argued, was rooted in the custody dispute, a bitter, escalating conflict over Veronica Butler's children that had driven Adams to a conclusion so extreme, so final, so utterly removed from any recognizable moral framework that it defies easy categorization. Within days of the disappearances, investigators found the bodies of Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly buried in a remote field in Texas County. They had been stabbed to death. Their deaths were not quick. The evidence indicated that these 2 young women suffered before they died. They were buried in the Oklahoma Panhandle dirt, hidden from the world, as if they were something to be discarded rather than 2 human beings whose children would spend the rest of their lives without them. The arrests followed quickly. Tadbert Cullum, Cora Twyman, and others connected to the conspiracy were taken into custody. And Tifany Machel Adams, the grandmother, the architect, the woman whose bitterness and ruthlessness had set the entire tragedy in motion, was arrested and charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder. The case drew national media attention. The Easter weekend timing, the remote panhandle setting, the custody dispute backstory, the involvement of a grandmother as the alleged mastermind. It was a combination of elements that made the case simultaneously unbelievable and, given the history of cold calculation in true crime, deeply and horribly believable to anyone who has spent time in this space. Tifany Machel Adams did not go to trial. On October 14, 2025, she entered a plea of no contest to 2 counts of first-degree murder. A no-contest plea is a legal maneuver that allows a defendant to accept a sentence without formally admitting guilt. But make no mistake, the legal outcome is identical to a guilty plea. The court treated it as such. On January 28, 2026, Tifany Machel Adams was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms in prison without the possibility of parole. She will never leave prison. The woman who orchestrated the murders of 2 young mothers, who sent killers to do what she had decided needed to be done, who had Veronica Butler and Julian Kelly stabbed to death and buried in a field. She will spend every remaining day of her life in a cell. And the children of Veronica Butler and Julian Kelly will grow up without their mothers. They will have birthdays without them. They will graduate without them. They will get married without them. They will have their own children someday without them. Every milestone, every triumph, every ordinary Tuesday, all of it motherless. Because of Tifany Machel Adams. Co-defendants Tad Burt Cullum and Cora Twyman also faced serious charges, and the legal proceedings against them progressed through the Oklahoma court system in the aftermath of Adams's sentencing. The full weight of what happened on Easter weekend 2024 is still being felt in courtrooms, in communities, and in the hearts of 2 families who will never be whole again. Tifany Machel Adams is currently serving 2 life terms without parole in Oklahoma. She will die in prison. Veronica Butler and Julian Kelly were 30 and 39 years old respectively. They were mothers. They were daughters. They were friends. They went to pick up children on Easter weekend and never came home. If this case hit you hard, let us know in the comments below. Please hit the like button and share this video so that Veronica's and Julian's stories reach as many people as possible. And if you are not subscribed to Cold Case Revisited, what are you waiting for? Hit subscribe right now. This channel exists because you support it. Let's keep going. Case 5, Juanita Gomez. Faith is supposed to be a source of comfort, of community, of guidance through the darkest moments of a human life. For billions of people around the world, religious belief is the foundation upon which they build everything else. Their values, their relationships, their understanding of right and wrong. And in most cases, that faith produces goodness. It produces charity and compassion and love. And then there are cases where something goes catastrophically, irreparably wrong. Where belief curdles into delusion. Where religious conviction becomes a vehicle for something so far removed from anything any legitimate faith tradition would recognize that the word religion almost feels insufficient to describe what happened. The case of Juanita Gomez is one of those cases. And it is one of the most disturbing stories we have ever covered on Cold Case Revisited. Juanita Gomez was 33 years old. She was an adult woman, living with her mother in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Whatever complicated dynamics existed within that household, whatever history lay between mother and daughter, Juanita was a grown woman, a person with her own life, her own relationships, her own future. She was not a child who could not defend herself or understand what was happening. She was an adult. And that makes what happened to her in August 2016 simultaneously more complex and, in its own way, even more disturbing. Juanita Gomez, Juanita's mother, became convinced, deeply, unshakably, catastrophically convinced, that her daughter was possessed by the devil. This belief, however it developed, and whatever combination of mental state and religious framework produced it, became the lens through which Juanita Gomez interpreted her daughter's behavior. And from that lens, she drew a conclusion that no legitimate religious tradition on earth would sanction, that the way to save her daughter was to force religious objects into her body. On August 27, 2016, Juanita Gomez attacked her daughter Geneva. She forced a crucifix and other religious objects down Geneva's throat. The physical trauma caused by this act was catastrophic. Juanita Gomez suffocated. She died in the home she shared with her mother. And when investigators arrived on the scene, they found Geneva's body arranged in a manner that suggested Juanita Gomez had placed her in a pose she may have associated with religious significance, with a cross left on her chest. Juanita Gomez did not flee. She did not immediately deny what had happened. The evidence at the scene told the story clearly, and when law enforcement investigated, the picture that emerged was one of the most disturbing domestic crime scenes in Oklahoma City's recent history. The investigation confirmed that Geneva's death was a homicide. Juanita Gomez was charged with first-degree murder. The case presented prosecutors with a particular challenge, not in terms of establishing what happened, but in terms of the defendant's mental state. Any case involving deeply held religious beliefs and behavior that appears delusional will inevitably raise questions about competency and sanity. Defense attorneys examined whether Juanita Gomez's mental state at the time of the killing might support an insanity defense. Ultimately, the jury was not persuaded by arguments that removed Juanita Gomez's criminal responsibility for Geneva's death. On January 11, 2018, a year and a half after Geneva died, Juanita Gomez was convicted of first-degree murder. On February 12, 2018, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She appealed her conviction. In 2019, the Oklahoma Court of Criminal Appeals reviewed the case and upheld the conviction. The appeals court found no basis to overturn the jury's verdict. Juanita Gomez was exactly where the law said she should be, in prison for life, without the possibility of ever walking free. There is something particularly haunting about the case of Geneva Gomez because of her age. She was 33 years old. She was not a toddler in a crib. She was not a child dependent on the goodwill of adults around her. She was a grown woman who was killed by her own mother, who died in what should have been a safe place, her own home, at the hands of someone who, in a terrible and twisted way, may have believed she was acting out of love. That does not make it less of a murder. It does not make Geneva less dead, but it adds a layer of tragedy to the story that is difficult to fully process. Juanita Gomez is currently serving a life sentence without parole in the Oklahoma Department of Corrections. Her conviction has been upheld through the appeals process. She will spend the rest of her life in prison. Geneva Gomez was 33 years old. She deserved to live. She deserved the rest of her life. She deserved safety in her own home. She got none of those things, but she got justice. And on Cold Case Revisited, she gets her story told. Please take a second right now and hit the like button for Geneva. Drop a comment below and let us know you heard her story. If you are watching this on a new device or you somehow haven't subscribed yet, please do that right now. Hit subscribe, hit the bell, and help Cold Case Revisited keep bringing these stories to the world. We are not done yet. Keep watching. Case 6, Meaonia Machel Allen. Some cases stay open for years. Some stay open for decades. And some, the ones that haunt investigators through entire careers, that sit in cold case filing cabinets gathering dust through multiple administrations, through the retirement of the officers who first worked the scene, through the passage of so much time that the crime itself begins to feel like something from another era. Some of those cases get solved. Not through a sudden witness coming forward, not through a deathbed confession, but through science. Through the relentless, extraordinary, almost miraculous advance of DNA technology and the investigative methodology known as genetic genealogy. The case of baby boy Hugo is one of those cases, and it is one of the most remarkable cold case resolutions in Oklahoma history. In 1993, in rural Choctaw County in southeastern Oklahoma, a newborn baby was found. He was male. He was a full-term infant, and he was dead. His tiny throat had been slashed. He had been born, and then, within minutes, within the very first moments of his existence on this earth, he had been killed. His body had been disposed of, left in a location where it would eventually be discovered, but where it had clearly been placed with the intention of concealment. The baby had no name. Investigators called him Baby Boy Hugo, a designation that gave him an identity of sorts, a name attached to a case number, a way to reference a life that had lasted so briefly it had not even been officially entered into the world's records before it was extinguished. For years, for nearly 3 decades, baby boy Hugo remained unidentified and unavenged. His case sat in the files of the Choctaw County Sheriff's Office as one of those cases that investigators never stopped caring about, but never had enough to move forward on. There was no identified mother. There were no witnesses who came forward. The forensic technology available in 1993 was not capable of providing the answers that the case demanded. And then the world changed. DNA technology advanced at a pace that would have seemed like science fiction to the investigators who first worked the baby boy Hugo scene in 1993. Genetic genealogy, the technique that cross-references DNA profiles against consumer genealogy databases to identify biological relatives and work backward to a suspect, began solving cold cases that had defeated law enforcement for generations. The Golden State Killer case in California demonstrated to the world what genetic genealogy could do, and law enforcement agencies across the country began applying the same methodology to their own unsolved cases. In 2022, nearly 30 years after baby boy Hugo was found, investigators using genetic genealogy identified a suspect, Meaonia Machel Allen. The DNA evidence pointed directly to Allen as the biological mother of the infant found in Choctaw County in 1993. She was located and arrested. She was charged with first-degree murder in the death of her newborn son. The case attracted significant attention both because of the nearly three-decade gap between the crime and the arrest, and because of the way it was solved, through the cutting-edge science of genetic genealogy applied to a very old case. It was a testament to the principle that cold cases are never truly closed, that advances in technology can reach back through decades and deliver accountability long after perpetrators have believed they escaped justice entirely. The legal proceedings that followed the arrest were complex. The first-degree murder charge, which carried the potential for the most severe sentencing, was ultimately resolved through a process that resulted in Meaonia Machel Allen being sentenced in 2025 to 5 years in prison and 15 years suspended for charges, including unlawful removal of a dead body and felony child neglect. The resolution of the murder charge through the plea process meant that the final sentence was significantly different from what a first-degree murder conviction would have carried. For advocates of baby boy Hugo, the outcome was complicated. On one hand, there was finally accountability. After nearly 30 years, the woman who took that infant's life in the first minutes of his existence was facing legal consequences. On the other hand, the sentence did not match the gravity of what was done to that child in 1993. But this much cannot be disputed. Baby boy Hugo was real. He was a human being. He breathed the air of this earth, however briefly. He had a biological mother who made a choice that no parent should ever make. And thanks to the extraordinary work of cold case investigators and the advances of genetic genealogy, he is no longer anonymous. His case is no longer unsolved. And Meaonia Machel Allen will carry the legal and moral weight of what she did for the rest of her life. Baby boy Hugo. He had no birthday celebrated. He had no name given to him in love. He had no chance. But he had investigators who never gave up. And he has Cold Case Revisited, where his story will be told to everyone who will listen. Baby boy Hugo deserves to be remembered. Please hit the like button and leave a comment below. Let this little one know the world remembers him. And please subscribe to Cold Case Revisited if you haven't already. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss a story. These are the stories that matter. Stay with us. Case 7, Rebecca Pettit. There is a concept in criminal law called circumstantial evidence. It is evidence that does not directly prove a fact, but that, when assembled carefully and presented to a jury, creates an inference so powerful and so inescapable that reasonable doubt cannot survive it. The case of Rebecca Pettit and her son Adam is a case built significantly on that kind of evidence. Evidence that, piece by piece, told the story of what happened in a Sequoia County home to a 6-year-old boy named Adam Pettit. Adam Pettit was 6 years old when he died in the year 2000 in Sequoia County, Oklahoma. He was a child in the fullest, most ordinary sense of that word. A little boy in the years when children are discovering the world, when everything is big and bright and full of possibility. He died from asphyxia. He was suffocated. And when his mother Rebecca Pettit was found, she had self-inflicted wounds consistent with a suicide attempt, as if she had made a decision that extended beyond her son to herself. Rebecca survived. Adam did not. The investigation into Adam Pettit's death raised immediate and serious questions about the cause and manner of his death. The medical examiner determined that Adam's death was not accidental. He had been suffocated, deliberately asphyxiated. And the circumstances in which he and his mother were found, combined with the physical evidence and the testimony that investigators and prosecutors assembled, pointed directly at Rebecca Pettit as responsible for her son's death. The prosecution's case was built carefully and thoroughly. Medical experts testified about the nature of Adam's injuries and the deliberate act required to cause them. Witnesses testified about Rebecca Pettit's state of mind, her behavior in the period leading up to Adam's death, and the circumstances of the household. The self-inflicted wounds found on Rebecca herself, prosecutors argued, were consistent with a woman who had decided to end both her son's life and her own, a murder-suicide attempt in which only one half of the plan was completed. The defense, as defenses in such cases typically do, challenged the evidence and the inferences drawn from it. But the jury that heard the case in Sequoyah County was not persuaded. Rebecca Pettit was convicted of first-degree murder in the death of her son Adam in 2005, 5 years after Adam died. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The court, reflecting the jury's recommendation and the severity of what had been done to a 6-year-old child, imposed the maximum sentence available. Rebecca Pettit would never be free again. There is something in the Rebecca Pettit case that distinguishes it from some of the others on this list, and it is not something that generates sympathy so much as it generates a particular kind of sadness alongside the horror. The self-inflicted wounds, the apparent attempt to die alongside her son. These details suggest a mental and emotional state of profound dysfunction, a person in a crisis so deep that she turned it into the most irreversible of acts. Whatever was happening inside Rebecca Pettit's mind in the year 2000, it produced a tragedy that claimed Adam's life and that ended Rebecca's life in every meaningful sense, replacing whatever future she might have had with the interior of a prison cell for the rest of her natural life. Adam Pettit was 6 years old. He should have grown up in Sequoyah County, in those Oklahoma hills, playing and learning and becoming someone. He never got the chance. His mother made sure of that. Rebecca Pettit is currently serving her life sentence without parole in the Oklahoma Department of Corrections. She will never leave prison. And Adam Pettit was 6 years old when his life was taken from him. He deserved every year he never got. Every birthday. Every scraped knee. Every summer. All of it taken. All of it gone. For Adam, please hit the like button and leave a comment below. Share this video so that people who have never heard Adam's name will hear it today. And if you're not subscribed to Cold Case Revisited, please subscribe right now and turn on notifications. Adam's story deserves to be heard. Let's keep going. Case 8. Caitlyn Cheyenne Downs. Not every case of a mother who failed her child involves her own hands being the direct instrument of death. Sometimes, and these cases are in their own way just as devastating, the failure is one of protection, of standing by, of choosing a partner over a child, of placing a child in harm's way and leaving them there, defenseless and vulnerable, while the person who was supposed to protect them above all else chose instead to look away. The case of Caitlyn Cheyenne Downs is that kind of case. And it is a case that raises one of the most difficult and painful questions in child welfare. What is the legal and moral responsibility of a parent who does not personally commit the act of violence, but who enables it, who facilitates it, who by their choices creates the conditions in which a child dies? The law has an answer to that question. And the answer is that the responsibility is real. The responsibility is serious. And the consequences are significant. Caitlyn Cheyenne Downs was 24 years old at the time the events central to this case unfolded. She was a mother of 3 young children, living in Duncan, Oklahoma, a small city in Stevens County in south-central Oklahoma. Stevens County sits in the heart of oil country, a working-class community of roughly 43,000 people where, like so many places across rural America, social services are stretched thin and the distance between a family in crisis and the help they need can be very wide. Downs was in a relationship with a man named Ryan Towell. The details of that relationship and of the environment that Towell's presence created in the home where Downs's 3 children lived are deeply troubling. Investigators and prosecutors would establish that the children in that home were subjected to conditions of neglect and abuse, conditions that Downs, as their mother, was aware of and did not take adequate steps to address or end. The tragedy at the center of this case is the death of Ely Newsome, Downs's 3-year-old son. Ely died from head injuries. Those head injuries were inflicted by Ryan Towell. Ely was 3 years old. He was a toddler. He was entirely dependent on the adults in his world for his safety, his welfare, his very survival. And the adults in his world failed him in the most catastrophic way. because the crimes occurred in Indian country under the legal framework established for federal criminal jurisdiction in Oklahoma, a framework that became particularly significant following the Supreme Court's 2020 McGirt decision, which dramatically expanded federal jurisdiction in significant portions of eastern and central Oklahoma. The case was prosecuted federally. This jurisdictional framework placed the prosecution in the hands of federal prosecutors, which shaped how the charges were framed and how the sentencing would ultimately be structured. Caitlyn Cheyenne Downs was charged with federal child abuse in Indian country. In September 2023, she pleaded guilty. She stood before a federal judge and acknowledged her role, not as the person who struck the fatal blows, but as the mother who did not protect her children from the man who did, who by her choices and her inaction created the environment in which Leann Newsome died at 3 years old. In February 2024, Caitlyn Cheyenne Downs was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. 15 years for the role she played in the death of her son and the abuse of her children. Ryan Towell, the man who directly inflicted the injuries that killed Leann, faced his own separate and serious charges. 15 years is not a life sentence. It is not the same as what some of the other mothers on this list received, but it represents the federal court's determination of her legal culpability within the specific charges she faced. And it means that Leann Newsome's mother, the person who was supposed to be his first and most fundamental protector, will spend 15 years in a federal prison because she chose not to protect him. Leann Newsome was 3 years old. He had 2 siblings who also lived in that home, who also experienced what he experienced. He was a toddler in Duncan, Oklahoma, and he never made it to his 4th birthday. His mother is in federal prison. His mother's boyfriend is facing charges for what he did to Leann and to those children. And Leann Newsome, 3 years old, a little boy with his whole life ahead of him, is gone. Cases like Leann's are a reminder that child protection is not just a legal obligation. It is a moral one. It is the most fundamental responsibility any parent carries. And when that responsibility is abandoned, whether through violence or through inaction, the consequences for children can be irreversible. For Leann Newsome, please hit the like button right now and leave a comment below. This little boy deserves to be remembered. If you're watching Cold Case Revisited for the first time, please subscribe. We do this for the victims, and your subscription keeps us going. Hit subscribe and turn on your notifications. We have more cases to cover. Stay with us. Case 9, Clorinda Alexis Archuleta. Every new parent knows the particular terror of bringing a newborn home from the hospital. The fragility of an infant, the way they seem almost impossibly small and delicate, the way every parent instinctively moves more carefully, speaks more softly, handles everything around that baby with a gentleness that feels almost involuntary. That terror is born from love. From the profound understanding that this tiny person depends on you absolutely. That their every need, their every moment of safety and warmth and comfort runs through you. For the twin infants at the center of the Clorinda Alexis Archuleta case, the person they depended on absolutely was the person who hurt them most. Clorinda Alexis Archuleta was a Tulsa mother whose infant twins became the subjects of a child abuse investigation that would eventually result in criminal charges and a sentence that reflected the extreme severity of what those babies had endured. The details of the abuse that Archuleta inflicted on her infant children are medically and forensically documented, and they are deeply disturbing. The infants suffered broken bones. They suffered fractured skulls. These are injuries that do not happen accidentally to infants in the ordinary course of life. Broken bones and fractured skulls on infants are, in the medical community, recognized as hallmarks of deliberate, non-accidental trauma, abuse inflicted with force on bodies so small and so fragile that any significant impact causes catastrophic damage. Radiological imaging, physical examination, and the testimony of medical experts all contributed to the evidentiary picture that prosecutors assembled in the Archuleta case. When law enforcement became involved and the medical evidence was reviewed, the gravity of what the twins had experienced became undeniable. Archuleta was charged with serious criminal counts related to the abuse she had inflicted on her own children. The prosecution built its case on the medical evidence, on expert testimony about the nature and cause of the injuries, and on the totality of circumstances surrounding the twins' welfare. In 2023, Clorinda Alexis Archuleta was convicted and sentenced to 3 concurrent life terms in the Oklahoma Department of Corrections. 3 life sentences, a sentence that reflected both the severity of the harm inflicted and the court's determination that Archuleta posed a danger that required permanent removal from society. 3 concurrent life terms mean that regardless of how the calculation runs, Clorinda Alexis Archuleta will die in prison. She will never return to the outside world. She will never again have access to children. The sentence was comprehensive, severe, and final. The twins, the infant children at the center of this case, survived. They survived what was done to them, though the long-term physical and developmental consequences of the injuries they sustained at their mother's hands are something that child welfare advocates and medical professionals will work with them on as they grow. The most important thing, in the most fundamental sense, is that they are alive. Not every child in cases like this survives. These 2 did. And the system, ultimately, protected them. Too late to prevent what happened, but in time to ensure that it stopped, and that the person responsible was held permanently accountable. There is a particular cruelty in infant abuse that is difficult to articulate without sounding like you are restating the obvious, but it bears saying directly. Infants cannot tell anyone what is happening to them. They cannot call for help. They cannot run. They cannot explain to a neighbor or a relative or a doctor what is being done to them at home. They can only cry. And if crying is not enough, if the person who should respond to that crying with comfort is instead the source of the pain, they have nothing. They are entirely alone with what is being done to them. That is the world those twins lived in for some period of their earliest lives. That world ended when law enforcement and child welfare intervened. And Clorinda Alexis Archuleta is now spending the rest of her life in a prison cell in Tulsa County. The twins are out in the world somewhere, growing, healing, living the life they almost did not get to have. Please hit the like button right now and leave a comment for those babies. If you are not subscribed to Cold Case Revisited, please take 5 seconds and hit subscribe right now. Turn on your notifications. We keep telling these stories because victims deserve a voice, and your support makes that possible. We have one more case to go. Stay with us to the end. Case 10, Camille Lewis. We come now to the final case in today's documentary. And we want to say before we begin that the story of Orlando Hugger Jr. is one that has stayed with every member of the Cold Case Revisited team since we first encountered it. Because Orlando was 10 years old. 10 years old is old enough to play video games and have a favorite sports team and argue about what to watch on television. It is old enough to have friends and jokes and opinions. It is old enough to have a personality that has fully emerged, a specific, irreplaceable, utterly unique human personality that, once it is gone, leaves a hole in the world that no one and nothing can fill. Orlando Hugger Jr. was 10 years old, and he is gone, and his mother, Camille Lewis, is in prison because of the role she played in what happened to him. The case of Camille Lewis is, in some structural ways, similar to that of Caitlyn Cheyenne Downs, which we covered earlier in this documentary. Both involve Oklahoma mothers. Both involve the death of a child at the hands of the mother's boyfriend. Both involve the catastrophic question of what it means for a parent to fail to protect. But the specifics of Orlando's case, the details of what he endured and the length of time over which he endured it, make this a case that stands fully and horribly on its own. Camille Lewis was a Tulsa mother. Her son Orlando Hugger Jr. was 10 years old when he died from injuries inflicted at the hands of her boyfriend. The abuse that preceded Orlando's death was not a single event. It was a pattern, a sustained, ongoing pattern of abuse that took place in the home where Orlando lived, in the home where Camille Lewis was present, in the home where she was his mother and his protector, and the person whose job above all other jobs was to make sure that her son was safe. She did not make sure he was safe. The investigation into Orlando's death established that the abuse was known to Camille Lewis, that she was aware of what was happening to her son and did not take the steps necessary to stop it, did not remove him from the home, did not call for help, did not place herself between her 10-year-old son and the man who was hurting him. The law in Oklahoma, as in most jurisdictions, holds that a parent who knowingly allows ongoing abuse to occur to their child bears serious criminal responsibility for that abuse and for its consequences, even if the parent did not personally inflict the injuries. Camille Lewis was charged with second-degree murder and child abuse charges in connection with Orlando's death. She pleaded guilty. In 2025, She was sentenced to 35 years in the Oklahoma Department of Corrections. 35 years. She will not be a young woman when she gets out, if she gets out. This sentence, while not technically a life sentence, represents a commitment of years so significant that it encompasses what would have been the most active and meaningful decades of her adult life. She will spend them in prison. The boyfriend who inflicted the injuries that killed Orlando Hugger Jr. faced his own charges, his own prosecution, and his own accounting with the justice system. But what the Cold Case Revisited team always comes back to in cases like Orlando's is this. He was 10 years old. He lived in that house. He ate breakfast in that kitchen. He went to sleep in that bedroom. He knew who his mother was. He loved her, the way 10-year-old children love their mothers, with a completeness and a trust that has not yet been complicated by the adult knowledge of how badly people can fail each other. And she let him down. Not in the small, human ways that every parent lets their child down at some point. In the ultimate way. In the way that cannot be taken back. In the way that ended with a 10-year-old boy dead and a Tulsa courtroom determining the sentence for the woman who should have saved him. Orlando Hugger Jr. was 10 years old. He had a name that carried his father's legacy in it. Jr., named for someone who came before him, someone who gave him that name in the hope that he would carry it forward through a long and full life. He will not get to carry it forward. He died at 10. But we carry his name. Cold Case Revisited carries his name today. And if you are watching this, you carry it now too. Orlando Hugger Jr., 10 years old. Tulsa, Oklahoma. Gone too soon. Never forgotten. Camille Lewis is currently serving 35 years in the Oklahoma Department of Corrections. The boyfriend responsible for the direct physical harm to Orlando is in the legal system, facing his own consequences. And Orlando Hugger Jr. rests, somewhere, beyond the reach of any more harm. For Orlando, please hit that like button right now. Please leave his name in the comments so that everyone who scrolls through knows that he was here and he mattered. And if you are not yet subscribed to Cold Case Revisited, please do it right now. Hit subscribe. Hit the bell. Help us keep telling the stories of children and victims who cannot tell their own. It means everything. It truly does. We have come to the end of today's documentary. 10 cases. 10 mothers. 10 devastating stories drawn from the soil and the communities of Oklahoma. From Meeker to Woodward to Muskogee to Oklahoma City to Tulsa. From the Panhandle Plains of Texas County to the hills of Sequoia County to the quiet streets of Duncan. Different places. Different circumstances. Different victims. All of them connected by the same unbearable thread. A mother who failed, catastrophically and permanently, in the most fundamental obligation a human being can carry. Kelsey Smith-Briggs was 2 years old. She had blonde hair and wide eyes, and she deserved every day she did not get. Logan Tucker was 6 years old, and somewhere in Woodward County, Oklahoma, he has not yet been found and brought home. Kason Tolliver was 18 and Chloe Tolliver was 16, and they were asleep when their world ended. Veronica Butler and Jillian Kelly were young mothers who drove out on Easter weekend to pick up children and never came back. Geneva Gomez was 33 years old, and she died in her own home at the hands of her own mother. Baby boy Hugo was minutes old, and he never had a chance. Adam Pettit was 6 years old in Sequoia County, and he never got to grow up. Ely Newsom was 3 years old in Duncan, Oklahoma, and he never made it to his 4th birthday. The infant twins in Tulsa survived, and they are somewhere out there today, alive, which is the only piece of light in a very dark case. And Orlando Hugger Jr. was 10 years old in Tulsa with his father's name and his whole life ahead of him, and he is gone. These are the victims. These are the names. And these are the women who will spend the rest of their lives in prison in the state of Oklahoma, removed from society, separated from freedom, held accountable in the way the law demands, because of what they did to the people they were supposed to love the most. We do not cover these cases for shock value. We do not tell these stories to exploit anyone's pain. We tell them because victims deserve to have their stories known. We tell them because the children and adults who suffered in these cases were real people with real lives and real futures, and those futures were taken from them. And the very least we can do is make sure the world knows their names. We tell them because accountability matters. Because remembering matters. Because the moment we stop talking about what was done to Kelsey and Logan and Kason and Chloe and Veronica and Jillian and Geneva and baby boy Hugo and Adam and Ely and Orlando is the moment we begin to let their stories fade into the silence that the people who hurt them may have hoped for. We will not be silent. Cold Case Revisited will not be silent. Thank you for watching today. Thank you for staying through every single one of these stories. Thank you for caring enough to spend this time with these victims and their legacies. It matters more than you know. If this documentary moved you, if it made you think, if it made you want to hug the people you love a little tighter today, please hit the like button right now. Leave a comment below with the name of the victim whose story stayed with you the most. Share this video with someone who needs to hear these stories. Because the more people who know, the more people who remember, and the more people who hold these victims in their hearts, the more these lives matter in the world. And if you are not yet subscribed to Cold Case Revisited, please subscribe right now. Hit the notification bell so that every time we release a new documentary, you are the first to know. This channel exists because of you. It grows because of you. And every view, every like, every subscription, every comment is a signal to this platform and to the world that these stories deserve to be told. We will be back. There are more cases. There are more victims. There are more stories that the world needs to hear. And Cold Case Revisited will be here to tell them. Until next time, stay safe, hold your loved ones close, and never forget the names of those who cannot speak for themselves. This has been Cold Case Revisited. Like, comment, subscribe, turn on notifications. We'll see you in the next one.